Okay, so you want to buy a salvage company. You spend $3 million sending two tugs into 40-foot seas to save a sinking cargo ship. 10 days of round-the-clock work. And if the ship goes down before you get it to port, you get nothing. Zero. Under international maritime law, if you don't save it, you don't get paid. But here's the strange part. The companies making the most money in this business aren't saving ships at all. They're sitting in port doing nothing, collecting checks. So let's talk about what it costs to get in, how the money really flows, and why the smartest people in this industry never go to sea. If you're starting small, you can build a coastal salvage operation for $1 to $5 million. One or two second-hand ocean tugs, $1 to $3 million each on the used market, basic diving equipment, a small crane barge. You're doing near-shore work, grounded yachts, dock collisions, a fishing vessel that rolled over in a harbor. Budget another $200,000 to $500,000 a year in maintenance, dry dock, fuel, crew, and insurance before you take your first job. Problem is, at this scale, you're competing with every guy who owns a tug and a phone. The margins are thin. A typical small vessel recovery pays $50,000 to $200,000. After costs, you might keep $20,000 to $80,000. It's work, but it's not the work that makes headlines. The real game starts at $20 to $50 million. That's a regional emergency response company. 3 to 5 specialized tugs, at least one rated for open ocean work with 100-plus tons of bollard pull, which is the measure of raw towing force. Think of it as horsepower, but for dragging a 50,000-ton ship sideways through a storm. A salvage barge with heavy-lift cranes, ROVs, remotely operated underwater vehicles, at $1 to $5 million each. A warehouse full of gear, oil booms, pumps, firefighting systems. You need 150 to 200 people on payroll, on standby, 24 hours a day. Annual operating costs run $5 to $10 million just to keep the lights on. But at this level, you qualify for something that changes the entire business model. More on that in a minute. The top tier? That's companies like Resolve Marine out of Fort Lauderdale, family-owned since 1984. Started with one tugboat, now pulling roughly $140 million a year with 400-plus employees worldwide. Or Smit Salvage, part of the Dutch giant Boskalis. Their towage and salvage division alone did about $440 million in 2025. Fleet of 400 to 500 vessels. These companies don't just own boats, they own relationships. Insurance company trust, decades of case history, government contracts all over the world. You can't buy that. You build it over 40 years, or you acquire someone who already did. But owning the equipment is just the entry ticket. So the obvious question, how does a salvage company actually get paid? You pull a ship off the rocks, someone writes you a check, right? Not quite. A salvage company gets paid in 3 ways. The last one is the reason people in this business get rich without ever touching a boat. The first is the oldest rule in maritime law. It's called no cure, no pay. You attempt to save a ship. If you succeed, you get paid. If you fail, you get nothing. Zero. Doesn't matter if you spent $5 million in fuel, equipment, and crew wages over 3 weeks. Doesn't matter if you risked your own vessel in 40-foot seas. Ship sinks, you eat the loss. When it works, the payout is huge. Under the Lloyd's Open form, the standard international salvage contract since 1892, your reward is a percentage of whatever you managed to save. The ship, the cargo, all of it. Typically 5% to 25%, rarely exceeds 40%. So you save a container vessel worth $80 million with $40 million in cargo? Your cut is somewhere between $6 million and $30 million for one job. That might take 2 weeks. But here's the flip side. You deploy 3 tugs, a dive team, a salvage barge, 2 weeks of round-the-clock operations in the North Atlantic. Total cost to you, $4 million. And the ship goes down anyway. You invoice? Zero. The ocean just ate your quarterly profit. Think of it as the world's most expensive poker game. You're betting your own equipment against the sea. And the sea doesn't bluff. The second way is called scopic. It exists because no cure, no pay created a nasty problem. If a tanker is leaking oil and the salvage crew knows the ship will probably sink anyway, Why spend millions trying to prevent an environmental disaster when you won't get paid if you fail? So the industry created a safety net. Under Scopic, you get paid by the hour. Your equipment has a published tariff. This tug costs $25,000 per day. This ROV costs $15,000 per day. This dive team costs $8,000 per day. Add them up, add 25% on top as a bonus, and that's your rate. Win or lose. You get paid for trying. It kicks in when the environmental risk is high. Oil tankers, chemical carriers, anything that might spill. Scopic doesn't make you rich, but it means you don't go bankrupt when the ship sinks anyway. Now, the third revenue stream. Remember when I said at the $20 million level you qualify for something that changes the entire business model? This is it. And it explains why the biggest salvage companies in the world aren't actually in the salvage business anymore. They're in the waiting business. In 1990, after the Exxon Valdez dumped 11 million gallons of crude oil into Alaska's Prince William Sound, the U.S. Congress passed OPA 90, the Oil Pollution Act. It says this: every vessel carrying oil in U.S. waters must have a prearranged contract with a qualified salvage and marine firefighting company. Not maybe, not if you feel like it. Must. That means every tanker, every cargo ship carrying its own fuel oil, every cruise liner operating in American waters is legally required to pay a salvage company a yearly fee. Just to be on standby. Just in case. The salvage company maintains regional depots, keeps tugs fueled and crewed, has equipment stockpiles positioned along the coast, and collects a check every year from every vessel in their coverage zone, whether anything happens or not. How much per vessel? Somewhere around $250 to $500 a year. Doesn't sound like much, but if you're covering a region with 300 to 500 ships passing through, that's $75,000 to $250,000 a year in guaranteed income, just for existing. Scale that up to a nationwide network, and you start to see why companies fight over these contracts. Think of it like a fire department. 95% of the time, the trucks sit in the garage, but you can't not have a fire department, and you can't not pay for it. This is why Boscalis paid to acquire Ardent Americas in 2020. They weren't buying boats. They were buying contracts. A network of OPA 90 standby agreements covering U.S. waters. Money that shows up every year whether ships hit rocks or not. For a large regional salvage company, 70% of annual revenue comes from standby contracts and oil spill cleanup contracts. Stable, predictable, not exciting. The other 30% comes from actual emergency jobs, the no cure, no pay gambles. High payout, but completely unpredictable. You might get 3 major calls in 1 year and none for the next 2. The real asset in this business isn't the tug, it's the contract. It's the phone number that insurance companies call at 2 a.m. when a container ship is taking on water off the Carolina coast. But that 30%, the emergency side, is where careers end overnight. You get a call. Container ship hard aground off the Gulf Coast. You mobilize 2 tugs, a dive team, a crane barge, 12 days on site, fuel, crew, equipment rental. You're $2 million deep. On day 13, the hull cracks. Ship breaks apart. Total loss. Under no cure, no pay, your invoice is 0. You just burned through a quarter of your annual profit for nothing. That's not a hypothetical. That's the math every small operator runs in their head before picking up the phone. January 13, 2012. The cruise ship Costa Concordia clips a rock off the Italian island of Giglio. Captain Francesco Schettino turns the ship too close to shore, a stunt called a salute, and rips a gash the length of half a football field into the hull. The ship capsizes in shallow water. 32 people die. What followed was the most expensive salvage operation in history. Titan Salvage, the same company that would later merge into Ardent, partnered with Italian firm Micoperi to remove the wreck. The problem? A 114,000-ton cruise ship lying on its side on an underwater rock shelf, just yards from a pristine marine reserve. You can't just cut it up. You can't tow it. You have to stand it back upright, a process called parbuckling, and no one had ever done it at this scale. It took 2.5 years. The total cost hit $2 billion. Sponsons, massive steel flotation tanks, were welded to the exposed side. Underwater platforms were built on the sea floor. On September 16, 2013, the ship was rotated upright in a 19-hour operation watched live worldwide. In July 2014, it was finally towed to Genoa for scrapping. The insurers paid. But here's what the headlines didn't mention. The contractor's profit margins on a $2 billion job were razor thin. Most of the money went straight to engineering, fabrication, and environmental protection. Titan and Mikoperi weren't getting rich. They were barely covering costs on a job no one had ever tried before. And for all that effort, Titan Salvage no longer exists as an independent entity. In 2015, Crowley Maritime merged Titan with Svitzer Salvage to form Ardent. In 2019, Ardent's management bought the company from its owners. In 2020, Boskalis bought Ardent's U.S. division. The company that pulled off the greatest salvage in history got chopped up and sold for parts within 8 years. And Titan isn't the only one. Smith International, independent for over a century, got bought by Boskalis in 2010. Almost no independent salvage company survives long term. The margins on actual salvage work aren't enough to keep a company alive on their own. Eventually, everyone gets swallowed by a bigger shipping or dredging company that can afford to run salvage at a loss because their other divisions make up the difference. The one exception? Resolve Marine. Founded by Joe Farrell with a single tug in 1980, still family-owned, still independent, still pulling $140 million a year without being absorbed. More than 4 decades, one family, in an industry that eats companies alive. That's the unicorn. And then there's the risk you can't insure against. Commercial diving, the kind salvage operations require, has one of the highest fatality rates of any civilian job in the country. Zero visibility water, toxic cargo residue, collapsed ship structures overhead. A salvage master's decisions carry lives on one hand and tens of millions of dollars on the other. One wrong call and both disappear. Time to pull it all together and answer the actual question. How much money do you make if you own a salvage company? Option 1. Small coastal operator. You put in $3 million, 2 tugs, basic gear, a small crew. You take near-shore jobs, grounded vessels, harbor incidents, small wreck removals. Annual revenue, $800,000 to $1.5 million. Operating costs, $500,000 to $800,000. Net profit, $200,000 to $700,000. Payback period, 5 to 10 years. One bad equipment failure eats a full year of profit. Option 2. Regional OPA 90 Emergency Response Company. Investment, $30 million. 5 tugs, ROVs, salvage barge, emergency depot, 150 crew on rotation. Standby contract revenue, $3 to $5 million per year, guaranteed. Actual emergency deployments, $2 to $8 million per year, unpredictable. Environmental compliance work, $1 to $3 million. Total revenue, $6 to $16 million. Operating costs, $5 to $10 million. Net profit, $1 to $6 million. Profit margin swings between 10% and 40%, depending on whether ships actually hit rocks that year. Payback period, 8 to 20 years. Option 3. You stop buying boats. Keep the contracts. Keep the OPA 90 qualifications. Keep the insurance company relationships. When a call comes in at 2 a.m., you subcontract someone else's tug, coordinate the response, and take a management fee. You become the middleman between panic and hardware. Lowest risk, highest margin. But it takes 20 years of showing up at 2 a.m. to earn the right to stop showing up. The smartest people in marine salvage haven't touched a tug in years. In this industry, the guys who sold their boats and kept their contracts, they sleep through the night. The guys who kept their boats and lost their contracts, they're scrapping steel in Bangladesh.